Atlanta, Georgia. The roar of tractor trailers shook the concrete ribs of the downtown connector, headlights knifing through the bitter air as traffic rushed along the I-75/85 overpass. Beneath those gray pillars where the cold pooled and crept into bones, an elderly woman curled on a piece of cardboard. To most drivers, she was invisible, a shadow among shadows, one more forgotten life folded into the city's underbelly. But if anyone had lingered long enough to really look, they would have seen her lips moving, not in complaint, not in rage. In prayer, soft words lifted to the Virgin Mary. They called her Cardboard Granny. Every night she pulled that worn rectangle from behind a graffiti-scored column, spread it carefully on the concrete as if performing a ritual, and knelt. The thundering traffic above drowned out most sounds, but her prayer rose like a small flame that refused to be bullied by the wind. Holy Mother, thank you for another day. If I don't wake tomorrow, let it be in your arms. No house. Number. Family. No hot meal. And yet, in her eyes, something unbreakable lived, a steadiness that hardship had failed to sweep away. Atlanta had seen homelessness before, but there was something different about her. A hush of peace around her, as if unseen hands were holding her up. This night seemed no different from the countless nights she had survived. But soon, the scrap of cardboard the world mocked as trash would become a stage for a miracle. And after, America would never look at the poor the same way again. Before the city nicknamed her Cardboard Granny, her name was Evelyn Carter. At 72, her story held more loss than most lives can carry. There had been a time when everything looked ordinary, even hopeful. Evelyn worked as a seamstress, coaxing lace and satin into wedding gowns and prom dresses for girls who dreamed big. Her husband, Leonard, was a quiet man with kind hands who spent years at a parts warehouse near Hapeville, sweating through summers and counting down to the day he'd have time to fish again. Together, they bought a small house on a street of leaning porches and azaleas that tried their best every spring. They filled it with plans, maybe a baby, maybe two. Sometimes plans come true. Sometimes they don't. The children never came. Doctors used words like complications and options, and then numbers that were bigger than anything their paychecks could understand. When Leonard's cough turned to scans, and the scans turned to a diagnosis you only speak aloud once, Evelyn sold her machines, then her grandmother's china, then finally the house, chasing bills that outran them anyway. She sat every evening at his bedside, holding his hand as the desert of his body spread, whispering Hail Marys into a room that smelled like antiseptic and a love that refused to leave. When he died, the quiet afterward was so complete she wasn't sure she had a voice anymore. She rented a small apartment off Metropolitan Parkway and took whatever work her stiffening fingers allowed, mending shirts, washing dishes, watching other people's babies. But arthritis thickened the joints that once danced over fabric, and diabetes barged in uninvited. The little she had left disappeared into pharmacy lines and past due notices. The landlord knocked with a soft apology and an eviction taped to an envelope. At 70, with no children to call and no savings to disguise fear, Evelyn stepped into a world she'd never imagined. Carrying a torn grocery bag with a few documents, an old rosary from her mother, and a faded picture of Leonard in a brimmed fishing hat. Atlanta winter's bite. That first week outside cut like a jealous thing. She tried shelters, but found them crowded or loud with fear. She asked distant cousins for help, but they were already balancing their own storms. Slowly she learned the map of survival. Which church lot left its spigot on, which parish hall served soup on Tuesdays, which strip of pavement was ignored by both security and drunks. And then, behind an appliance store, she found it, a slab of refrigerator cardboard, trash to anyone else. To her salvation, she folded it under her arm like treasure. From that day on, it became her bed, her shield, The one thing she could set down and reclaim. Every morning she folded it gently, as if it were silk. Every night she unfurled it with care, as if preparing an altar. People snickered sometimes when they saw her, the way the city trains you to mock what unnerves you. There goes the old lady with her portable bed. Others refused to see her at all. Even then, Evelyn's lips kept moving with the same small, fierce words. Forgive them. Holy Mother, they don't see what you see. The shape of her world had been reduced to a single piece of cardboard, and still she guarded it with a dignity that cold couldn't crack, that cruelty couldn't steal, that hunger couldn't buy. When the overpass grew quiet and the night pressed close, she knelt on that rectangle, pressing her knees into concrete that remembered the day's heat and the city's anger. The air stank of gasoline and rust, and still her prayer rose. She didn't beg for an apartment. She didn't bargain for money. She said the same thing she'd said for years in kitchens and waiting rooms and now in the city's throat. Holy Mother, thank you for another day. If I don't wake tomorrow, let it be in your arms. Truckers thundered overhead, ignorant of the woman who knelt with a devotion many pews never see. Sometimes other men and women drifted by and paused. They saw those strangled hands fingering a rosary with 2 beads missing, those eyes closed. Against the hard night, a few laughed, a few looked away. Some lingered, unsettled by the strength pouring out of a body so thin. Evelyn never preached. She offered no speeches. She prayed aloud and sometimes inserted names that weren't hers. The man with the cough who slept 2 columns over, the woman with the bruised face, the boy whose sneakers were too thin. She believed the mother who stood at the cross still, stooped under bridges. Hunger clawed sometimes so fiercely that her whole frame trembled. On those nights, doubt whispered, "Why keep praying? Who's listening?" She pressed a rosary to her lips and remembered her own mama's voice. Mary never abandons her children. Faith didn't magic away the ache. It didn't put stew in her bowl. But it wrapped her with a strange quiet that turned strangers' meanness back on itself. Once a cop nudged her cardboard with his boot. "Move along, ma'am, not a camping zone." She gathered her things like the tide, slowly, without argument, and said, "God bless you, son. May the Virgin watch over you." The officer froze. In a posture he had not trained for, undone by gentleness he didn't expect. On one of Atlanta's cruelest mornings, her body made its request the way bodies do. Now, she had scavenged a stale dinner roll from a trash bin behind a diner on Whitehall. The only thing between her and another day of emptiness. Her fingers shook with need when he appeared, an emaciated pit bull, ribs like fence slats, eyes too big. It growled at the bread. Most people would have shouted or thrown rocks. Evelyn didn't move. She met his gaze with the same calm save for nights when the cold got a voice. "Here, baby," she said, breaking the roll in half. "You're hungry too." She set the piece down and slid it forward. The dog snatched it and melted back in the shadow. Her stomach roared with disappointment. She pressed both hands to her chest and whispered, "Holy Mother, I'll be fine." He needed it more. Across the street, leaning against a news van, a reporter named Marcus Reed had been filming a segment on petty crime. His camera caught the whole exchange, the starving dog, the trembling hands, the gift. He lowered the lens, stunned. Years of shootings and fires and city hall scandals had taught him what people did in a pinch. He had not seen this to Evelyn. It wasn't an act of heroism. Everything belonged to God, every creature too. She had always believed that. And if you believed it, you shared. But that moment would become a spark that leapt fences she didn't know existed. December dragged, its iron wind down Peachtree and across Woodruff Park. A stage rose there under banner screaming, "Atlanta Renewal Initiative." City officials in dark coats and donors in brighter ones stood shoulder to shoulder, promising solutions and quoting numbers. Schoolchildren in matching polos clapped on cue. At the edge of the crowd, unnoticed at first, stood Evelyn frayed cardigan, duct-taped. Shoes, cardboard folded like a flag under her arm. She didn't push forward. She didn't shout. She smiled faintly and listened as men vowed to end homelessness without ever letting their eyes rest on a homeless face. And then the thing happened you wish you could forget as soon as you hear it. A visiting developer pointed vaguely and said, into the mic, "And what about that old woman over there? Is that the future we want?" Laughter rippled. The mayor leaned forward, microphone hot. "She's been around for years, sleeps under the connector. Some folks just can't be helped." More laughter. A deputy added, "Saw her eat out of a dumpster behind a KFC once. That's her level." The cruelty amplified itself through speakers across the square, each joke another stone. Evelyn lowered her gaze, cheeks warming, but her grip on the cardboard didn't loosen. The crowd, baptized in derision, began to jeer until a woman in a red coat stepped off the stage, a plate in her hand. Cameras pivoted eagerly. The plate held a thick sandwich. "Here you go, Grandma," the woman cooed. "You must be starving." Evelyn's eyes flashed with a gratitude as clean as water. Her hands reached. Just before they touched, the woman let the sandwich slide. It hit the bricks with a wet slap. Mayonnaise and meat splintered across grit. "Oops," she chirped, heel grinding. The bread. "But you're used to eating off the ground, aren't you? Go on." The crowd howled. Phones lifted. A photographer snapped the shot he'd been hoping for, the kneeling pour. Evelyn didn't curse. She didn't spit. She bent with the delicacy of someone gathering altar flowers, lifting each piece, brushing off what she could with her sleeve, tucking it into a plastic bag. Her lips moved with the only words that made sense to her. "Forgive them, Holy Mother. They don't know what they do." The laughter rolled on until she disappeared into the market stalls. The show resumed. Promises. Clapping. But not everyone laughed. At the back, Marcus Reed stood still, camera running. He had documented 1,000 uglinesses. He had never seen a quiet like that quiet, or a dignity that refused to be humiliated. That night, in a small apartment off Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard, Marcus sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop turning the room into a cave of blue. He replayed the footage. He trimmed it. He muted the jokes. He let Evelyn's hands tell the story. Across the screen, he typed simple words. "Cardboard Granny. True dignity cannot be destroyed." At 11:43 p.m., he clicked upload Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. He had under 1,000 followers total. He expected maybe a few dozen likes, and one or two kind comments. He closed the laptop and tried to sleep dot by dawn. His phone felt like a living thing, buzzing itself across the nightstand. Notifications blurred. The clip had detonated. Hundreds of thousands of views by breakfast. Millions by noon. The hashtag cardboard granny topped trends nationwide. Comments piled like snow on a fence. "I'm crying at 6 a.m. This woman has more grace than anyone I know. I'm not religious, but this feels holy. How do we find her? How do we help?" Influencers riposted. Athletes shared it. Morning news hosts choked up mid-sentence. The video sprinted past Atlanta, appeared on screens in Seattle and Miami, then jumped oceans, though it didn't need to cross any to do what it was doing already. But beyond numbers, something old stirred. People didn't just watch. They acted. Donations to shelters surged. Soup kitchens saw lines of volunteers instead of only clients. Parents asked their kids to help pack blessing bags with socks and snacks. Office workers set aside lunch money for someone else's lunch. All because one frail woman had bent to pick up a sandwich with a tenderness that rebuked the world. Evelyn prayed under the bridge that night as usual. unaware that heaven had already lifted her name onto 1,000 tongues. Holy Mother, thank you for another day. The mother had taken a humiliation and turned it into a light dot by day 3. The clip had passed 20 million views. TV anchors debated dignity. Pastors played the video in sanctuaries. Everyone kept asking the same thing. Who is she? Reporters fanned out screenshots on their phones. Parish volunteers and social workers joined them. Do you know her, the woman with the cardboard? The answers were mixed. Some rolled their eyes. Her? Always muttering prayers to Mary. Waste of time. Others softened. She gave me half her soup when I was sick. She blesses the kids walking to school. She never asks for anything. A newsstand owner near a MARTA stop leaned over his stack of papers and pointed toward the thicket of columns. She sleeps down under the connector. Folks call her Cardboard Granny. Name's Evelyn, I think. That evening, Marcus went back. With 2 colleagues, 2 social workers holding blankets and a tote of food, and a woman named Gabriela Ruiz, a representative from a Catholic foundation in Chicago, who had watched the video on a layover and booked a flight before her coffee cooled. They found Evelyn where she always was, curled on her rectangle, rosary knotted in her fingers. When she woke and saw strangers, panic twitched in her shoulders. She struggled to sit, whispering, "I'm sorry. Am I in your way? I'll move." "No, ma'am," Marcus said, dropping to a knee. "Please don't move. We came to find you." She blinked at the kindness crowding her little square of concrete. She'd been invisible so long that this sudden visibility felt like a mistake. Gabriella draped a blanket around her shoulders. "Why are you here?" Evelyn asked. "I'm just an old woman with a piece of cardboard." "You're the woman who reminded the world what dignity looks like," Gabriella said, taking her hand. "Millions have seen you. They're not laughing. They're praying. They want to help." Evelyn shook her head. "I didn't do anything. I only prayed to the Blessed Mother and shared what I had." They led her to a nearby parish hall the priest had opened after watching the video. Cameras waited outside. Inside, the light was soft and merciful. Father Anthony, gray at the temples, brought a hot plate. Evelyn bowed her head first. "Thank you, Holy Mother," she whispered, then ate like someone whose body remembered the rules of gratitude. She slept in a real bed that night, a thin quilt over bones that had forgotten softness. While she rested, the city, and then the country, moved. Donations poured in. Hundreds at first, then thousands, then so many zeros someone else had to count them. A Catholic foundation announced a fund in her honor. Volunteers spilled into underpasses with blankets and broth. People who had once thrown side glances now looked full on and said hello in the morning. Evelyn woke and reached for her rosary. Her cardboard lay folded neatly by the bed, not discarded, honored. She knelt. As she prayed, a warmth filled the room, not the cranky heat of the radiator, but something like an embrace. On the dresser stood a small statue of the Virgin Mary. For a breath's width of time, the statue seemed alive, eyes tender, mouth nearly moving. The voice Evelyn heard wasn't in the air. It bloomed inside her like a flower opening all at once. "My daughter, you gave when you had nothing. You shared when you were hungry. Watch now as my son multiplies what you offered. You are not forgotten. Be my hands for those still on the streets." Tears came, not violent, just steady. Whether vision, dream, or grace, she believed every syllable by afternoon. At a press conference crowded with microphones, Gabriella announced the creation of Our Lady's Table, an initiative to build shelters, soup kitchens, and medical outposts in cities that had long ago closed their eyes. When a reporter asked who would lead it, Gabriella turned toward Evelyn. A murmur swept the room. Cameras flashed like lightning. Evelyn put her hand to her chest. "No, I'm not fit. I'm just an old woman. That's exactly why, Gabriella smiled. Because you never forgot the ground. Because your faith already changed us. Evelyn nodded finally with one condition. Let me sleep on my cardboard one night a week. So I never forget the bridge, the cold, and the ones still waiting for their miracle. The room went still, as if someone had offered a prayer. The first shelter opened 3 weeks later in a renovated parish basement off Boulevard. 50 clean beds, hot meals, simple lockers, a nurse's cot. The line snaked around the block, but there was little pushing, little fear. People walked in like humans, not files. Evelyn insisted on being there every morning. No office door. No title on a plaque. She arrived at dawn in her same coat, her rectangle of cardboard tucked under her arm. Volunteers watched as she greeted each person by name, even when she'd learned the name only yesterday. Good morning, Robert House. That cough? Hi. Teresa, your grandson like those shoes? God bless you, Mark. The Virgin has not forgotten you. To men and women who had felt erased, hearing their names pronounced in kindness did more than soup. Soon soup kitchens sprouted first in Atlanta's West End, then in Birmingham, then in Charlotte and Jacksonville. A mobile clinic staffed by Catholic doctors began doing rounds under bridges and down alleys, dressing wounds, checking blood sugar, writing prescriptions, bringing what hospitals had forgotten to bring. But the most seismic change wasn't a building. It was a turn of the heart. Store owners who had chased Evelyn from their doors began setting aside food at closing. School children started blanket drives instead of bake sales. People who used to avert their eyes now asked, "How are you?" and waited to hear an answer. They called it the Evelyn effect. Priests preached about it. City leaders who had mocked her quoted her. Through it all, she kept her vow. One night a week she left a warm bed, returned to the harsh acoustics of the overpass, and laid out the old rectangle. Some shook their heads. At the act, to Evelyn, it was sacrament. If I forget the bridge, she'd say, smoothing the cardboard, I'll forget the one still here. The Blessed Mother didn't lift me up to turn my back. What began in Atlanta didn't ask permission. To stay put, news shows replayed the clip of an old woman gathering a ruined sandwich like it was something precious. Late-night hosts who lived on sarcasm set it aside for one night. Meanwhile, bishops and deacons and people who didn't like bishops or deacons took the cue and lit candles. Requests arrived. Colleges invited her to speak. Nonprofits asked for advice. The most surprising invitation came from New York. The United Nations wanted her to address a session on human dignity. I don't speak politician, Evelyn said, half smiling, half afraid. You speak mother, Father Anthony replied. That's what the world has forgotten. The day she stood at that tall podium in Manhattan, the hall shimmered with translation headsets and a silence that belongs to hospitals and churches. Evelyn wore her simple coat. In her hands, she carried her folded cardboard. She did not read from a teleprompter. She looked at faces that had given orders her whole lives and said in a voice that trembled at first and then steadied, My name is Evelyn Carter. For 2 years, this cardboard was my bed under a highway in Atlanta. People laughed at me, stepped over me, called me useless. But the Virgin Mary did not turn her face away. She taught me poverty is not the absence of money. It's the absence of love. Love can be restored if we dare to see each other as family. When she finished, people who had argued treaties stood and clapped like they were trying to wake a sleeping world. Some cried. It wasn't policy. It was a mother's instruction. And it was enough to move the heavy needle a millimeter closer to mercy. Fame could not seduce her. She stayed simple so the mission could grow. With the donations swelling and volunteers showing up in shoes and in souls, Our Lady's Table launched its boldest effort, the Cardboard Academy of Our Lady. No ivy walls, No endowments carved into stone. The faculty? Men and women who had survived sidewalks and shelters and found their way back to themselves. Courses? How to forgive when you've been wronged. How to share when you have nothing left. How to stand up without stepping on anyone. How to see Mary in the dark. Students came wearing suits and shoes with holes. Executives sat beside veterans and single moms, learning to let poverty teach them instead of letting pity patronize them. For many, it was the first time they saw the poor as teachers. Something human and holy reordered itself. Employers created second-chance programs. High schools required service hours that actually meant service. Families kept snack bags in their cars and greeted people at red lights with names instead of nods. City officials rethought the ordinances that criminalized being poor. Churches rebooted their outreach with humility. In city after city, small acts stacked until they looked like a revolution. The media tried to brand it. Evelyn shrugged at labels and pointed to the painting of the Virgin in the shelter lobby. "Don't look at me," she told a cable anchor. "Look at her. She taught me to keep loving when I had nothing." By the time she turned 80, Cardboard Academy meant something in dozens of cities. It meant dignity restored, rooms warmed, hands held, names remembered. And at the center was an elderly woman with hair like winter, eyes like morning, and a rectangle of cardboard she still folded like prayer. She lived to 82. Her step shortened. Her hands shook pouring coffee, but her gaze, that steady thing, did not dim. People called her the richest woman in America, not for money, for love multiplied. Awards came the way autumn leaves. Come colorful, sometimes noisy. She accepted them so she could talk about someone else. When a major prize placed a medallion around her neck, a reporter asked what it meant. She lifted the rectangle she carried in her other hand. "This is my real prize," she said gently. "This is where the Virgin found me, even as honors." Stacked, she returned every week to the overpass. Volunteers and friends sometimes spread their own cardboard next to hers. What started as survival became solidarity. She would smile at the row of rectangles. "Remember," she'd say, "the Blessed Mother walked with me here first. She walks with you too." The morning she did not wake was clear and cold. She had insisted, as always, on one more night under the bridge. She lay down with a thin blanket over her and her cardboard beneath like an old friend. She said the prayer that had outlasted apartments and awards. "Holy Mother, thank you for another day. If I don't wake tomorrow, let it be in your arms." Dawn climbed the columns. Traffic hummed above. Her breathing did not resume. News of her death traveled faster than the first video had. In Atlanta, thousands gathered, each carrying a square of cardboard with a prayer scrawled across it. In Houston, Boston, Phoenix, and towns that don't make maps, people lit candles on stoops and in sanctuaries. Social feeds filled with a single line: "We are all cardboard." Grandchildren. Her funeral brought a city together that had needed to practice being together. Formerly, homeless men wore borrowed suits beside CEOs in tailored ones. Children carried white flowers. Choirs sang Marian hymns that made even the undecided cry. When the casket passed down Peachtree, people lifted their rectangles like a forest of small altars. A museum in Washington asked for her original piece of cardboard. It rests now behind glass, a bronze plaque beneath it, the bed of a woman who taught a nation that true wealth is love. But her legacy lived in places glass can't keep. The shelters she started multiplied. The mobile clinics took new routes. The Cardboard Academy expanded to 50 cities, then more. Policy nudged. Parishes burned with a steadier flame. And in quiet rooms across America, people who had never prayed before learned to whisper thanks into the night. Years later, A second grader in Atlanta was asked what she wanted to be when she grew up. She held up a folded square of cardboard and said, with all the certainty in the world, like Grandma Evelyn, "I want to help the Virgin change things." The story of Evelyn Carter, Cardboard Granny, proved something the busy world had nearly forgotten. Miracles are not rare fireworks save for cathedrals and Capitol steps. They are made daily in small, stubborn choices, sharing a crust of bread, forgiving cruelty, kneeling on cold pavement and believing someone hears, trusting that the weakest vessel may be the one heaven uses to show the strongest love. Evelyn died on a piece of cardboard, but she lives in the faces warmed by soup, in the hands that pass blankets, in the policies rewritten with dignity at their core, in the prayers whispered under bridges that remember her name. If her journey placed even a candle's worth of light in your heart, carry it to someone standing in the dark. Tell them what Marcus tells new volunteers on the first night, standing at the shelter door with a smile that looks a little like surrender and a lot like hope. There was an old woman under an overpass who prayed when no one saw. The world saw her, and then it remembered how to see everyone else. And somewhere beyond the noise of traffic and timelines, a mother keeps walking through the cold, finding her children one by one and bringing them home.